afternoon, everybody, and thank you for your time. Thank you, Radcliffe Institute, and the generous donors of my fellowship for the wonderful opportunity. Thank you, Radcliffe, also for funding me for the exploratory seminar. Paul is not here. Thank you. It was a cherry on the cake. Thank you, Liz and Judy, for your leadership and steering this tremendous program. Thank you, Sharon, Rebecca. Thank you, Paul and Asma, for all the help you rendered to us. Thank you, Mervy, Katie, and yes, thank you, Margarita. Thank you, Michael Fisher, for leading me to this wonderful place. Thank you, fellow fellows, for your fellowship and the great presentations you made thus far. I hope I don't return you disappointed today. Thank you, Rachna, for all the sacrifices you have made, and I'm making it public. Well, I've been thinking how best to bring you, though my job is significantly easy now of what Judy has already said, how to bring this book in such a short period of time to you. I'm reminded here of an Urdu poet who tells his beloved that, should you like, I will justify the title. Telling the entire tale would take a lifetime. Let me then briefly justify my title. And I'm reading this because I'm not a scholar of art and literature, therefore I find prose very difficult. I'm very, good at other things. The book Life in the Himalaya reviews Himalayas past and present in terms of its natural and cultural endowments vis-a-vis contemporary challenges it faces. I hope the book will bring this important but much neglected region into sharp international focus. Life in the Himalaya explores the mountain in its 4 distinct stages. 1, the natural phase, which comprises Himalaya's geobiological consolidation and development of human culture that symbolizes moksha, or the salvation. Salvation through human expression of mountain temple metaphor. It points to an inherent human impulse to reconstruct the mountain and therefore a yearning for ascension. The second phase, the cultural phase of the Himalaya, covers nomadic pastoral communities for the last 15,000 years, and it reaches the climax with commercial deforestation during British Raj, who sowed the seeds of discontent and conflict between the people, the local communities, and the state. And then the third phase, the mechanical phase, which is marked by burgeoning human population growth, urbanization, and large-scale infrastructure and dam projects, which are causing unprecedented ecosystem degradation and biological extinctions. And finally, the need for a network phase or networking phase, which necessitates information sharing and institutional cooperation in search of the safe space for the Himalaya. Now, this is the kind of a context. And before I get to my slides, I also want to read a para from my from chapter 2 of my proposed book. This is titled The Lure of the Mountain, Sacrifice and the Moksha. The Himalaya predates the arrival of humans on earth, but celebration of its grandeur is entrenched in the lore and legend of the mountain. The Himalayan memoir forms an integral part of the shared inheritance of Asia, where humans witness the final phase of Himalaya rise towards the end of Pleistocene glaciation. The grand spectacle that unfolded before our ancestors' eyes must have been an edifying experience for the mind. Hindus often speak of such experience in terms of ananda, which presages boundless sense of fulfillment and peace, and it means much more than joy and bliss. The massive rock that stands high above the ground is not merely a conglomeration of stone, but to the vast humanity, irrespective of color, creed, faith, and nationality, it is a living magnet that pulls the weak and the strong alike towards it. The Himalaya's unequivocal exhortation by the visitor goes beyond the simple description of the scenic beauty, the sparkling snowfields, the floral tapestry, and the fragrance, the diversity of life in its colors. The journey alone elevates the experience to a deeper understanding and meaning of life. The Himalayan legend abounds in symbols that underpin man's abiding faith in the sacredness and divinity of the mountain. Willie Unsold, I'm not able to pronounce it properly. It's Unsold. He was a Swiss American, first American to scale Mount Everest in 1963, was so enthralled by the divine pull of Nanda Devi, which is about 8,000 meters, that he named his daughter Nanda Devi after the mountain. Nanda Devi Unsold was a proficient mountaineer and accompanied her father on several such mountain expeditions. Sadly, during one of the expeditions to Uttarakhand Himalaya, young Nanda Devi died in September 8, 1976 at age 22. She had gone against team physicians' advice to go down to a lower level because of the snowstorm. Nanda Devi was a wildlife biology major and had developed great interest in conservation of endangered species such as cats of the East. Even though she was averse to mountain climbing as a full-time vocation, she felt almost mystical about the climb she was about to undertake. Before setting off for what turned out to be her last climb, she told an interviewer, which I quote here, "I can't describe it, but there is something within me about this mountain ever since I was born." Unquote. Willie Unsold buried his daughter around Camp 4 at 7,300 meters under the snows of her namesake mountain. There is no way to verify if Willie Unsold had known that in Garhwal, Himalaya, Nanda is metaphorically used for daughters. My wife, when addressed as Nanda by her grandmother, caught me by surprise some years ago. Now, let me now go to my slides. Okay, so this has already been talked, so I will not. So let me go to the beginning. Why Himalaya? Why do we need to know about Himalaya? What is so important about Himalaya? What we need to appreciate is that Himalaya, once it emerged, changed the way the Earth operated. So emergence of Himalaya was is considered as one of the most significant geophysical events in a billion years, in 100 million years. So it was remarkably different. And one of the significances was that Himalaya, during just at the beginning of Cenozoic, it started a global cooling of Earth. So Earth completely cooled, and the reason was that this massive land surface, which is just about 4% of the world's land surface, it contributes 25% of global sediment flux. So a lot of chemical weathering of rocks uses a silicate, which takes up lots of carbon dioxide, and then it is buried under ocean. Therefore, once there is huge carbon dioxide, withdrawal from the atmosphere, then there's global cooling. Geologically, it is the youngest and the tallest mountain. Biologically, it is the longest bioclimatic elevation gradient. Hydrologically, this is the most elaborate drainage network of 10 basins, and it's a global biodiversity hotspot with most biodiverse biomes, even more diverse than others. The least known scientifically, unfortunately, there is high species and human cultural diversity. One thing which I want to pause here, I was surprised while I was researching for this book that the entire Tibetan plateau, which is thousands of squares of kilometers, has just about 5 or 6 dialects spoken in this entire from west to east. But if you come down to the southern declivity of Himalaya, there are 800 plus dialects spoken. In fact, there is a joke in Arunachal Pradesh. If you cross the river, you will not be able to understand the other guy on the other side of other bank. So much of diversity. And so 10 major river systems. This is also referred to as third pole because it has the largest ice fields outside of the polar region, 60,000 square kilometers. Then 1.5 billion people live in its basins, and we believe that it is the warmest of the mountains on Earth. And moreover, it's my home. And sadly, it is also the most militarized mountain in the world. So, the oldest description of Himalaya goes back to Kumarasambhava, written by Kalidasa. And I have absolutely no idea, 2,500 years ago, how did this guy, who was a poet, he he says that this is the only mountain on the earth which sinks to the eastern and the western seas. And this is, of course, then he writes all the great poetry, but this was in 5th century BC. And when the first of these satellite imageries came, and then people realized, indeed, this is the only mountain which exactly, if you go to the east, then through Arakan Yomas, then go down, almost touching the Pacific Ocean. And on the western side, through Hindu Kush and the Suleiman ranges to the Caucasus, almost touch. They do touch the Western Sea. I have no idea that how did he do it, what kind of mechanism he had to know it. So possibly, I think poets have that strange vision which scientists lack. Ross, that makes you happy. Okay. Now, going to the birth of Himalaya, I call it tectonic serendipity because, as you can see, about 225 million years ago, India was part of this Gondwana land. And this is the only southern hemisphere craton or plate which started a northward journey. And, it made a journey of 4,000 miles at varying speeds from 4.5 centimeters to 18 centimeters. And then docked itself here just below the Eurasian plate. So, and once it docked, so there was this, this is the Eurasian plate, and this is the approaching Indian plate. In between is the Tethys Sea. So slowly when the Indian plate approached the Eurasian plate, got docked under it, because it was a denser plate, got submerged, and tectonic forces, then this is how it got lifted, and that's how Himalaya were born. I'm simplifying it, but for this. Therefore, people suggested that it was a continent-to-continental collision. So sometimes collisions are good. It's not bad. It's not such a bad idea. So therefore, once these tectonic processes were completed, they led to landform evolution, but at the same time that they became this huge wall, this mountain wall became barrier to moist winds which were coming from the Indian Ocean. Therefore, for the first time, one of the most beautiful seasons in India is called monsoon. There's nothing on this world like monsoon. So, first time Indian subcontinent experienced the rainfall of the monsoon about 20 to 10 million years ago. There is a lot of, and these, once the elevational gradient became high, you had these glaciers. So you have monsoons, you have glaciers, and then once you have glaciers, there are perennial rivers. And once this stage is set, the humans arrive. This is such remarkable, and I will come to it, that, I am not for a moment suggesting that there is some design, intelligent design bit. But what was happening, that nothing was happening till Miocene. What was happening, of course, is that Himalaya, once it got docked under this, under the Asian plate, it became a sort of international biological highway. So by that time it was still warm, so you had large number of species coming as far as North America, going through and then crossing this Indo-Chinese plateau and going up to Japan and vice versa. So a kind of an international exchange happened because of Himalaya. That's part one. Part two is that recent genetic studies now confirm that the evolution and being the Indian subcontinent played an extremely important role to the march of human civilization. But for it, human civilization wouldn't have progressed beyond it. This is a paper in Science where they very clearly say, I wanted to see that what if India wasn't there? How can we? So I, of course, didn't. So this is how it looks. Without India, so India is not here. So India still is not here. Now, humans cannot cross this Arabian Peninsula, go north, because it is Ice Age. Ice Age, which lasted till 12,000, so there was no way. So what happened was, therefore, so we bring India back here. Okay? So by magic, India comes in. So once India comes here, It forms a complete, terrestrial connectivity between oceans which are separated, and then they proliferate all over the world. I'm not again suggesting that if Indian plate was not there or Himalaya were not there, human civilization couldn't have progressed. But surely it would have got, delayed by 25,000 years minimum. Okay, so you can imagine where it would have been now. I will go through this quickly because this is how a simple mountain chain can be transformed into a complex physiographic. I do not want again go into geophysical details, but simply to tell you that imagine a mountain slope. Okay, so small pressure from below, which is the tectonic force, and the river and glaciers, they act as saws, and so this is how it looks like. So a river cuts a V-shaped valley, and a glacier makes what is called a U-shaped valley. So Himalaya is only about V-shaped valleys and U-shaped valleys. So from a simple structure, it became a complex topography. Now, so you have at the end of, as I said, at the end of Miocene and Pleistocene, so you have all kinds of species coming from North America, China, Europe, Mediterranean, all places, and then agriculture started about 4,500 to 6,000 years ago. So this is the kind of profile that Himalaya came to have in the eastern and western side. There is a little bit of difference between east and west, because as you can see here, the western side is as 34 degree north latitude, this is 24 degrees, so there's a 10 degree difference between latitude. Therefore, there is a little bit of difference between eastern and the western Himalaya. But general profile of this is how the general profile of Himalaya looks like. So coming to part 2, I know I have to cover a lot of ground, so I'm doing it fast. So these are some of the drivers of course, there are global, there are regional, local. I will mostly, concentrate on some of the local and regional drivers. So the first one is this burgeoning human population that Judy talked about. So you have in the Himalaya, in the Himalayan region, across the countries, India, Pakistan, China, or Tibet, or some. So 2.8 times to 4 times there is an increase in the last 50 years. So much population growth in that region, which has a low carrying capacity, expanding agriculture, and expanding settlements. Whether these are mountain tops or valleys, they are full of people. Therefore, that is putting a lot of pressure. Now, you make houses fine, but you look at traditional houses. This was a paper which I published some years ago. This is a traditional kind of a village. So you have mostly traditional stone masonry, wood structures. The houses are much broader than tall. Therefore, they can withstand earthquakes and things like that. But today you have these shanties coming up, which are mostly reinforced cement concrete structures, which add to what is called the urban heat island effect. And so other major problem with the Himalaya was that in about 2003, first Survey of India report, Forest Survey of India reports came, and they started claiming that Himalayan forests were increasing indeed. And if you can see the government data, this is how the government data is. So it's increasing. So as a regular visitor to Himalaya, I found it rather disconcerting that agriculture is expanding, human settlements are expanding, all kind of infrastructure is expanding. Unless Earth is elastic, you can't have forests expanding. So there must be something wrong with it. So I started this work. So this was almost literally backbreaking. So you had almost 370 such pieces to exactly one by one from east to west to do, and we did this. And what we found was that there was a massive deforestation in the Himalaya, across the Himalaya. And you can see, this is a close-up picture. You can see in 1970, these were dense forests. And you can see here. So camera doesn't lie. Okay? So most of these dense forests were converted into open forests, so deforestation was going on. The second unfortunate problem we found is that, as I said, it's a highly militarized zone. I have no time to go to the politics of it, but simply to tell you that no ecologist, no biologist, nobody has even looked at the impact of roughly 10 to 13 million individuals living there in that mountain space. What kind of impact it's having nobody knows. But I'll just, start. What impact it had was that you must be aware of China Tibet engagement in 1950s. So one thing which China did to begin with was to have a massive road network built in the entire region, which culminated in recently in this is a chapter in my book called First Train to Lhasa. And therefore, this was essentially to sustain the military kind of infrastructure which was there. And India wanted road for road. So, because there was a massive defeat which India suffered in 1962 war at the hands of China, so there was a lot of pressure on the Indian government that we should have a large number of roads. Be that as it may, so roads infrastructure started coming up. This is another chapter which I call a streetcar. At that point of time in 1970s, we had Mrs. Gandhi as the Prime Minister. Her son was a rather very nice gentleman. So he wanted to build, to revolutionize motor vehicle industry in India. So he started a company called Maruti at that point of time. Unfortunately, he did not live to see that. He died in an air crash. But subsequently, Maruti did. And Maruti changed the complete landscape of Himalaya. Now, this is again, nobody talks about it. You can see till about 1980, you have about 25,000 cars being manufactured in India. And suddenly after 80, you can see this boom going up. Okay? And then what it had, once you have roads, once you have a nice little car which can take a 4, 5, 6 people to close by mountain, then most of the people living in the in the towns and cities near Himalaya, so everybody on a weekend would just put father, mother, maybe 2 children, just go to Himalaya. And what did it? And of course, as Judy said, that this new religious awakening in the Himalaya, that pardon me by saying so, but if Muslims can go to Hajj, why can't we go to our destination? So a massive movement of people across the Himalaya. Fortunately, unfortunately, most of our gods, they chose Himalaya. We are pursuing them even there. We're not leaving them alone. So, okay. So the consequence in scientific terms was that now you had a lot of vehicles going into the region, and these carbon black and other pollutants are increasing heavily. Now look here, you can see this is Satopan Glacier. Satopan Glacier is the glacier which is very close to where from Ganga or Ganges comes out. Now you have roughly 3.6 or 116 times higher than Arctic and Antarctic, the black carbon levels. You can imagine in those deep, high valleys of Himalaya, you have such huge amounts of carbon black. And the consequence is that the glaciers are now melting because of carbon black. It absorbs sunlight much faster, and therefore the glacial recession has started in a big way. So the fourth problem is that what I call in a chapter called dam rivers. So in that these are a couple of works which we published where we find that Himalaya is likely to have the highest dam densities in the world. That means that for every kilometer or every 14 kilometers, there is going to be a dam. Every 14 kilometer river length. And other places, it is anywhere between 57 to 70 kilometers. Once upon a time, Graf, talked about America being a dam nation. But India and China are soon going to replace America as a dam nations. So we have today nearly 1,300 dams on 2 sides of the Himalaya coming up. So about 550 dams in India, Pakistan, Nepal, and Bhutan, and then roughly about 750 dams across Tibet. So we were looking at something called 1,300 dams. You can imagine if somebody after 5 or 6 years or 10 years took a satellite picture, so Himalaya would look like a moth-eaten Himalaya. Only small ponds and rivers flowing through turbines or head race tunnels inside. There's no water. You'll never see now those waters coming. So that's one. We were also interested that, after all, where were these dams located? What kind of conflict they had with the biological diversity of Himalaya? And this is an unrelated work which we were doing, and at that time, this was purely an academic work, that how species are distributed across the Himalaya. That doesn't mean that all species occur everywhere, but what we found was across the taxonomic groups, whether they are mammals and fish, or birds, butterflies, and plants, so you have these mid-altitudes or mid-elevations where you have maximum number of species. And when we superimposed hydro projects or dams on them, we found there was a perfect overlap. I'm sure that nobody had designed it that way, but it turned out to be this was an unfortunate overlap, and therefore so this is how, this is a picture of the dams. We were then we got to look at, okay, all right, this is happening to terrestrial ecosystems. What's happening to the rivers themselves? So what we found was, in summary, that if you have more water in a river at a given point of time, you are likely to have more number of species in that river, fish species. If you decrease the quantum of water yield in the river, then the species richness in that river will significantly go down. That's part one. Part two is this was a recent work which we published about 2 months back, that some of the endemic species are almost getting, they are going extinct from large number of Himalayan rivers because of dams and also water withdrawal. So whether it is terrestrial ecosystems or aquatic ecosystems like rivers, there is a problem everywhere. We did this study which we used species area-related models and predicted that by the turn of the century there will be just 10% of dense forest left in the Himalaya, and nearly 25% of the endemic species which are only found in the Himalaya would go extinct. Okay. Now part third of my talk is the leitmotif of my being here. So by 2001 to 3, there was a lot of talk going on. There's a new talent narrative started developing. They call themselves climate change skeptics, and they started saying that, oh, it's all hogwash. There's no truth in it. There's nothing like that. And when the endorsement came from the top, then it makes it all the more serious. So at that point of time, we were investigating this, and we were surprised to find these plants after, say, 120, 130 years or 100 years. So it wasn't that surprising, but what was surprising was that they were not located where they were known earlier. They were located at much higher elevations. At that point of time, we cautiously suggested that possibly because they were finding cooler temperatures higher, about 500 to 800 meters, so they had migrated, but we didn't have any proof. So naturally, a professor can do nothing more than look for a graduate student. that to a zealot. So a zealot joined, and she said, I will do it. So we got together. We were lucky. Actually, we were looking for a historical data set that can we go back possibly 150 or 130 years and then revisit those areas and then see comparatively that was there any change happening. We were, as I said, we got lucky. We had two data sets, one of Smith and Cave 1911 and then also 1872 of Tohokas. So we looked at 124 endemic species, 121 sampling locations, and 625 study plots. These are the kind of areas which we visited and studied. Okay. So these are the kind of species that we were looking for. These are only endemics. We took only endemics because if we had projected species elevation range shifts, then people could have criticized us that this species grows there, everywhere. So we took only endemics which grow only in those areas. These are, okay, I will not go here. So, and what we find indeed is that exactly there was a climate-induced elevation range shifts. Most of these species, almost 90% of the species had moved almost 800 to 1,000 meters. Not only, and then we also were lucky that we had historic temperature data sets of these regions. What we found interestingly was that those summers were relatively warmer, but it was winters that were more warm than usual. So that was one key finding. And what we also found was that the lapse rate means that every 100 meters you go up, how much temperature will decrease. So the historic lapse rate, which was 1872, which Hooker had recorded, was 0.82 degrees Celsius per 100 meters. What we found was 0.42, so almost halved. So lapse rate. And then, as I said, more winter warming than what was recorded. So what we found was that now, suppose a species has this kind of a range, prior to warming. Now it had like this. So the elevation ranges had shortened and they had been pushed up. Now, the problem was that we also found that species richness per hectare had decreased. This problem was because those species which had area available to them to colonize, they could go, but there is a limit to space. So those which did not have, they went extinct. So a large number of species went extinct in the Himalaya. So now the last part of the talk is the payback time. Look at this. This is what's happening. This is Gangotri Glacier from where Ganges comes out. This is the 1780 level, and this is 2001 level. And these are glaciers across the Himalaya. You can see all glaciers across the Himalaya are showing recession and decrease. There's an interesting photograph of 1921 and 2009. You can see again glaciers disappearing and now glacial lakes coming. In our own studies, we found that, for example, in Sikkim, Himalaya, we found that not only had number of glacial lakes increased in last 30 years, but the volume of glacial lakes, volume of water had also increased. Now, does Himalayan change mean a global problem? I think yes. Now, what does it mean? Now, look at this. These are some of the recent, the data is old, but then emphasis is new, that you have lot of whatever increase in sea level will happen, it will happen because of melting of ice. And these studies show that for every 100-meter rise, 35 centimeters would be contributed by the recession of Himalayan glaciers. Therefore, about 40 million years back, Himalaya played a key role in bringing temperatures of entire Earth down by several degrees. Now, it is possible that the Himalayan glaciers will raise sea levels significantly. Therefore, it must concern coastal Americans as much. Now, the cumulative impacts of all this, again using species richness, species area relationship models, we found what will happen in each case, and this is a depressing scenario that large number of species will go extinct. But more importantly, what is happening in the Himalaya is that these lovely, alpine meadows are disappearing. They are disappearing fast. You can see this is again a kind of a modeling study which we projected in 2050, 2070, using these representative concentration pathways of carbon dioxide. You can see the shrubs are increasing in extent and herbs are slowly decreasing in extent. This is how it looks, the scenario by 2070. You will have very few herbaceous communities and mostly the shrub communities. This is how the Valley of Flowers looked in 1970s and late 1970s. This is how it looks today. So you can see a large number of shrubs and woody plants getting into these alpine. Now, what it means is that this kind of disappearance of alpine meadows in the Himalaya is sharply bringing in conflict the people who are dependent on this first resource. So most of their traditional medicine comes from these herbaceous plants, and most of their spices, condiments which they use in their daily lives, they still come from there. I have taken one example of yak here. Yak is at the base of the pyramid. Now, there's nothing yak cannot do. In fact, the Himalayan highlands were colonized by humans only after they could domesticate or partially domesticate yak. Because yak gave, whether it is dung, whether it is cheese, whether it is meat, and at times when it becomes extremely, when there is no water, it gives them the blood. They drink its blood. So even after death, The bones are made into these nice pipes, you can see. And the fat is used for lighting lamps, whether in monasteries or in houses, or this nice wool, or the under fur, and the long fur is used in making tents, or sometimes if you wish you can have a nice wig, and then the combs to take care of that wig. So therefore this particular animal is central to that culture, is central to that habitat and ecosystem. If the grasses are gone, because yak doesn't know how to eat shrubs, rhododendron and select shrubs, it just doesn't know. It only knows eating grass. And if grass goes, then yak goes. If yak goes, a whole lot of cultural extinction will happen, which will be a sad tragedy on Earth. Therefore, some years back, again, I've been getting lucky several times in my life. So when the Editors of Nature accepted that I should bring this to the world focus, I wrote an op-ed in Nature, and that's how I brought to this world focus, and that's how Michael Fisher got in touch with me, and that's how I came to Radcliffe Institute. Finally, I just want to end this talk by quoting Emily Dickinson, daughter of New England. This is called God Made a Little Gentian. You must have been, sort of surmising, why am I talking about gentian? What has gentian got to do with it? This is what it's got. It says, God made a little gentian, it tried to be a rose, and failed, and all the summer laughed. But just before the snows, there came a purple creature that ravished all the hill, and summer hid her forehead, and mockery was still. The frosts were her condition. The Tyrian would not come. Tyrian is this color. We have been talking about this color. The Tyrian would not come until north evoked it. Creator, shall I bloom? So the problem is we can keep on fighting, whether it is 1 degree Celsius, 2 degrees Celsius, or half a degree Celsius. We can keep on discussing it between climate, doomsday sayers and skeptics and what you have. The problem is, does north evoke the frost? If north is unable to evoke frost, we will not have gentians. We will not have grasses. We will not have yak. If we do not have that, then our own survival is in danger. Thank you for your patient listening.